There's a house with a girl inside, such a nice and to his bride. Katie sees a friend in need, Orbie. It's Katie and Orbie, and here's a bunch of stories about Katie and Orbie and all the things they do. Katie's friend Orbie now has a brand new family. They teach him that people all have some good inside. Fly a kite, find a snake, camp beside or learn to skate. Build a snowman with your friend Orbie. Fly a kite, find a snake, camp beside or learn to skate. Build a snowman with your friend Orbie. Adventure and playtime should always last a lifetime. And with friends like Orbie, the fun is guaranteed. So Katie and Orbie are ready with their story, playing and learning from all the things they do. As the sun begins each day, our new friend is here to stay.
It had been an early morning. Katie found out that if you go out onto the grass on the morning after it's been cut, a lot of that grass might end up on your shoes. Orbie learned that birds can see worms poking their heads out of the ground from their perch way up on a tree branch. And they both discovered that their neighborhood is very quiet the first thing in the morning. The phone rang early that morning. Katie and Orbie were lying on the couch, bundled up in a comforter and looking at books. Dad came trudging down the stairs, half asleep. When he answered the phone, Mrs. Perrette began telling him about the bike day, and it took him a minute to realize what she was saying. But then he grinned. It sounded like a lot of fun, he said, and the family would certainly love to be part of it. When Dad turned around, he found two of his favorite people on the planet right there at his feet. The friends were eager to know what their family was going to be part of. Dad crouched down to explain that Mrs. Perrette had just read in the newspaper about a Decorate Your Bike Day. Each neighborhood was invited to enter a team of bikes. The event was to take place tomorrow downtown. There would be a parade of bikes through the city streets. Orbie tooted and climbed up on the banister, doing a one-handed handstand on it. He was so excited. Katie puzzled over what Dad had just said. She asked him how they would ride on the city streets. Bikes weren't allowed on city streets, at least not kids' bikes. Dad told her that that was the fun of it. Certain streets would be closed so that no cars were allowed to drive there, only bikes. It would be safe. Well, with that, Katie did a great whoopee! And they all zipped off to see what Mom thought. Mom was washing her face at the sink and was a little surprised to see her whole family pile into the bathroom. Katie and Orbie, talking at the same time, explained about the bike day. Dad smiled as widely as Katie and Orbie, and Mom smiled too. It was a fabulous idea. After a quick breakfast, the two friends raced out the front door with Dad in tow to tell their friends about the bike day. By mid-morning, the whole neighborhood had heard about the event and had agreed that it would be great fun to participate. Bikes were hauled out and washed, and everybody discussed ways of making their bikes special. Orbie made a big cardboard shell with Mom's help, and he painted it to look like a flying saucer. When he dressed up as an astronaut and sat on his bike, it looked like he was in the flying saucer. Katie decided hers would be a fairy bike, and she attached her big costume wings to the back of the seat. They fluttered in the breeze. She draped sparkly material over the handlebars and hung strings of sparkling sequins from it. She would wear her fairy costume in the parade. Yi Ping decorated her bike as a beautiful white unicorn. Andy's bike became a fire truck. Arthur made his bike look like a bag of jelly beans. That is, when he sat on it in his jelly bean costume. It looked so funny as the costume puffed out the bottom. Tom wrapped his spokes in tinfoil so they caught the sun and looked shiny as the wheels turned. Miguel made his look like a bull. A mask of a bull's face sat over the handlebars, topped off with cardboard horns. Miguel himself was dressed as a bullfighter. Charisse, who was going to use her wheelchair, planned to dress as a gypsy and carry a crystal ball on a little tray on her lap. The tray was to be covered in a long red velvet cloth to make it look like a gypsy's table. Everybody helped the others with the finishing touches. That afternoon, when all the bikes were ready and lined up, Mrs. Perret announced that they had a very impressive neighborhood entry. Each bike looked smashing. The next morning, the entire neighborhood was up early. As everyone got ready to load up the bikes and go downtown, Dad asked everyone to wait. He brought out clothespins and small pieces of cardboard and attached a set of each to both the back and front spokes of all the bikes. He asked Andy to drive his around to show what would happen, and the friends clapped with joy when they heard the clicking sound. As he clipped the last one, Dad announced that everyone had done a great job. They all agreed and gave 3 cheers for their neighborhood before they headed off. Once they arrived downtown and unloaded the bikes, adjusted costumes, and got ready to take their turn, Dad spread his arms wide and told them they certainly were going to be noticed. And I have to tell you, they were. Even the parade coordinator looked twice when he told them they could go, and the loud clicking sound started up. The friends just couldn't help but giggle to themselves. And you know, Dad was right. As they rolled down the street, the crowd turned to see what the noise was and who was making it. And the crowd clapped and cheered for each bike. The friends all loved riding on the big paved road and going under the traffic lights. The day was a huge success. And the judges chose their neighborhood as the most dazzling and unforgettable. When they all got home and removed bikes from cars and costumes from kids, everybody was pretty tired. Nobody felt like cooking and then washing dishes. And that's when Mom suggested that they continue the day by having a neighborhood celebration dinner. The cheers rang in her ears. She ordered 12 extra-large pizzas, and there was lemonade for everyone. And after the pizza, Dad and Tom scooped out ice cream cones to top it all off. Katie hugged Orbie. The Decorate Your Bike Day had been fabulous fun. It was great to do something together with your neighborhood. Orbie was quiet for a moment. Katie asked him, was there something wrong? Orbie shook his head and said nothing. He was just dreaming up ideas for his bike next year. Katie giggled. And I hope if you do a Decorate Your Bike Day, that you'll have as much fun as Katie and Orbie and all their neighbors did. I just know that whatever you do, your bike will be marvelous.
Did you know? Near the North and South Pole, there are times in the year when the sun seems to never go down. Imagine if it was light out all day and night. Because the Earth rotates on an angle like this, the days seem longer, depending how close you are to the sun. Golly, how would you know when to go to sleep?
It had been a day of playing games. Katie learned that even if you hold the dice with the sixes up, when you throw them, there's no telling where the sixes will be when the dice land on the table. Orbie found out that if you jiggle the game board, reaching for your juice, you may have to start the whole game over. And they both discovered that if you don't put all the pieces back in the game box, you might lose some and not be able to play it next time. Katie and Orbie had just finished a game of checkers and were getting pretty hungry. When all the pieces had been put away and the checkers box was back on the shelf, the two friends headed down the stairs. Dad was in the living room making some notes on a pad of paper for one of his projects. And Mom was in the basement trying to fix an old brass lamp. Katie went ahead into the kitchen to pull out the carrot sticks and dip that Mom had left in the refrigerator for them. It was as Orbie was passing the TV that he noticed there was a little red light on the VCR. It had been left on. He pushed the power off button and the light went out. Pleased that he had done a helpful thing, he bopped off to the kitchen. But before he'd taken 3 steps, he stopped, and he thought about what had just taken place. He realized that even though the VCR could not talk, the light on the machine had told him something. This thought intrigued Orbie as he sauntered into the kitchen for the carrot snacks. The kitchen smelled of something very yummy. As Orbie sat down and crunched on a carrot, he looked over at the stove. It also had a red light on. Orbie knew it was saying the burner was on, and inside the pot on top of it, something was cooking. And his nose told him that whatever was cooking smelled like dessert. The light meant that to be safe, he should keep away. He told Katie of his observation, and she was a bit interested, but she was even more interested in keeping the dip on her carrot and giggled every time it fell off. Orbie soon forgot about the red lights until he and Katie went into Mom and Dad's room to look for Chance. On Dad's bureau, the electric clock was flashing numbers at him. Now, he knew it wasn't supposed to flash, so when Dad came into the room, Orbie pointed it out. Dad sighed and went over to it, and he explained that the power had gone out for a few minutes, and the clock was telling him that. Orbie looked at Katie. Lights were definitely talking to them. Katie scratched her head. Later, Mom had to go to the hardware store to pick up a fancy light bulb. Katie and Orbie were delighted to go with her because she was taking the bus. It was as they got to the crosswalk that Katie began to understand what Orbie had been burbling about. When Katie pushed the walk button, the crosswalk light flashed yellow. It flashed to all the cars. The light told the cars to stop. Someone was walking across the street. On the next street, they came to a set of traffic lights. The pedestrians walk symbol, a little man walking, was lit up. Orbie pointed out that it was telling the walkers that they could go. When they got halfway across the street, it started to flash orange. It was now telling them to hurry safely to the other side. Orbie was delighted to be able to understand the language of lights, and he looked for more. On the bus, Orbie noticed that the bus driver had all kinds of lights in front of him. He told Orbie the lights helped him know how his bus was running. Orbie sat right behind him. He noticed that when the bus drove out onto the street again, a little light shaped like an arrow flashed on and off, just like in Dad's car. The bus driver told Orbie that that was his signal light, and it told everybody on the road he was moving out into traffic again. Orbie burbled to Katie that lights were very clever things. As the bus bumped along, Katie asked Orbie what it would be like if lights were alive and they could play with you. Orbie smiled. He thought he'd like that. As the bus jerked forward again, Orbie closed his eyes and imagined that the lights were actually playing with him. They were playing tag. Orbie was running away from them. Then he turned and ran right through them. And as he did, his whole body lit up with the different colored lights inside. The lights were dancing. The bouncing and jumping they did actually tickled his tummy. He started to giggle. He grabbed his tummy until he realized it was Katie who was tickling him. She told him they were at the hardware store. Inside the store, the two friends started to hunt for lights that were telling them things. The first one was on the door button for people who couldn't open the door by themselves, like Charisse. Orbie pushed it, and slowly the door opened. Next, Katie found a flashing light that directed her eyes to a brand new display. Orbie noticed a tiny one on the pager the clerk wore on her belt. As the clerk showed Mum the fancy light bulbs, she explained to Orbie that the little light told her that her pager was on, waiting for a call. At the cashier's, Katie found lights on the cash register computer. Actually, she found a whole bunch. On the bus home, Katie and Orbie chattered away. There were all kinds of things that had lights, and the lights told them a great deal of information. As she walked in the front door, Katie said that although the lights weren't using any words at all, Orbie was completely right. They sure were telling them a lot of things. Just then the timer on the oven dinged, and Dad hurried into the kitchen. He pulled out the chicken that he'd cooked while they were gone. Katie looked at Orbie. Orbie looked right back at her. Sounds were speaking to them, too, without actual words being spoken. Just then the doorbell rang. Katie and Orbie spun around at the same moment. Everybody knew what the doorbell meant. It could mean a friend was calling. And do you know that if you look for lights and listen for sounds, where you live, you'll discover the very same thing. They are talking to you without saying a word. Isn't that kind of amazing?
A deep, deep sleep for the whole winter. That's called hibernation. Bats, bears, and snakes eat plenty of food in the fall, and then spend the whole winter in such deep sleep that they can't even be woken up, not even with an alarm clock.
It had been a sunny day at the beach. Katie learned that if you stand near the water, the waves will gently tumble up to tickle your toes. Orbie found out that crabs scurry off and hide in the sand when they know you're looking for them. And they both discovered that a broken piece of colored glass can get rounded and smoothed by the sand and the waves of the ocean. Katie and Orbie sat under a great big beach umbrella. They'd just finished their picnic lunch. As Mum packed up the cooler, he looked around for Dad. He'd gone for a walk. He told the friends that he'd been a while, so he must have discovered something interesting. She then asked them what they were planning to do next. They'd already dug in the sand and swum in the waves. Katie looked over at the sand behind them. It seemed to form mountains, and she wondered if it would be fun to go mountain climbing. Mom told them that sand mountains were called dunes. She thought exploring them would be a good idea. They could pretend that they were going on a desert safari. Mom explained that a safari meant a trip or expedition in search of something. If they were going on a safari, Orbie thought they should make special safari hats with Dad's newspaper. Mom agreed as Dad was finished with the newspaper. She helped her friends fold 3 hats, and I have to tell you that little did they know that on their safari, they were soon going to find a mystery. They all ran over to the dunes, and as they tried to run up the first dune, a funny thing happened. Their feet sank in, and some of the dune slipped away underneath them. Climbing up was very hard, but great fun. They laughed and shrieked as they tried to get to the top. And when they reached the top, they all noticed a very peculiar thing. Ahead of them, several dunes away, a little boy was bouncing way up in the air and down again. It looked like he was bouncing on the dune. Katie and Orbie were very puzzled. Mom tried to get a better look, but as she turned, her foot dug into the sand, which slipped, and with a shriek, she tumbled all the way down the other side to the bottom. Her laughter trailed behind her all the way. Katie and Orbie, eager to solve the mystery of what the boy was bouncing on, and of course to save Mom, rushed down after her. Once Mom had brushed herself off and readjusted her paper hat, they all scrambled up the side of the second dune. Above them, the boy rose up into the air, wiggled and spun, and then sank down again. The two friends had never seen anything like it before. Mom told them it was a real mystery. They climbed up to the very top. When they looked up again, the boy was gone, and to their utter astonishment, the person now bouncing was Dad. Dad wiggled in the air, and Katie and Orbie giggled at him. Orbie burbled that maybe it was a giant elastic band. Katie thought it might be a huge spring. It was quite a mystery. Just too curious to chat, Katie and Orbie leapt down that dune and scrambled up the last one. Mom followed. As they stood on the top, Dad waved his arms and said he couldn't stop bouncing. Katie and Orbie laughed. What on earth was he on? It looked like a black, rubbery flying saucer to Orbie. It looked like a giant licorice candy to Katie. And by this time, Dad was pretending to walk on air every time he bounced up. Mom told them the mystery was solved. It was a water trampoline. She said trampolines were made of a stretchy material held with spring. It made a person bounce up high when they jumped on it. Before she could say more, the two friends disappeared down the last dune and ran over to Dad. Mom scurried after them. The trampoline was out a bit from the shore. There were two people called spotters who were there to help if you needed them. As Katie and Orbie arrived, Dad climbed off. He said they could all have a go, and Mom thought that she would rather be a watcher. Katie took the first turn. She handed off her hat to Mom as Dad and one of the spotters whisked her up onto the trampoline. And immediately she could feel the springy, bouncy feeling of it under her feet. She gave a little jump and was surprised by how much higher up she went than usual. She tried again, pushing off a little harder, and as she rose in the air, she could feel her stomach lift up too. It felt a lot like she was flying. She giggled and laughed and called to Orbie that it was a lot of fun. Each time she was up in the air, she could feel the wind blowing through her hair. Once she had her balance, she lifted up her feet and landed on her bottom. Next, she did a ballet stag leap. Lastly, she jumped up and turned around in the air. She had a terrific time. And at the end of her turn, her family and everybody watching clapped for her. It was Orbie's turn, and it wasn't a moment too soon. Orbie could barely wait for Katie to finish. And when he felt how springy the trampoline was, Orbie was delighted, and with each bounce, he flew higher in the air and did a little dance while he was up there. Then tried a triple mid-air cartwheel and landed beautifully. Next, he went into a swan dive position, and as he fell toward the trampoline, he flipped over just in time to land on his bottom and bounce back up. He did all kinds of Orbie acrobatics. Everyone watching was spellbound. Everyone clapped for Orbie. Orbie and Katie could still feel the bouncing as they walked back around the dunes. It had been a great day. They had solved a mystery, had a great time beach bouncing, as Orbie called it. Katie and Orbie were already thinking of things to try the next time that they came to the beach for a bounce. And do you know, if you had been there at the beach that day, I'm sure you'd have had fun mystery solving and beach bouncing, just like Katie and Orbie. And I happen to imagine that you would be very good at both.